The void of space stretched endlessly around the Calypso, a sleek research and exploration vessel designed for long-haul missions into the unknown. The ship glided silently toward its target, an enormous, derelict alien craft that drifted in the shadow of Vorath, a dead world with a dim, sickly glow. Captain Elias Kane stood at the helm, his sharp green eyes fixed on the ghostly ship ahead. He had seen plenty of wrecks in his career, but something about this one unsettled him. The ship was massive, unlike anything in human records, its hull twisted as though torn apart from within. A dull, pulsing signal emanated from it, faint but insistent, as if it were calling for help or warning them away. Lieutenant Mira Vasquez studied the readouts, her fingers flying over the holographic display. "No signs of life," she reported, though the uncertainty in her voice suggested she wasn't convinced. "Radiation levels are within acceptable limits. The ship's power core is nearly depleted. But there's something else, a kind of organic mass scattered through the corridors." Drax, the ship's chief engineer, grunted. Organic mass? Could be a bioweapon accident, or maybe some kind of infestation. His voice was as rough as the stubble on his chin. Solomon Reeves, their medic, leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "I don't like this. If there were survivors, they'd have responded by now. And if there aren't, there's a reason why." The ship's AI, Nova, spoke in its crisp, emotionless tone. "The distress signal's origin is within the central command chamber. Docking procedures are ready." Kane exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "All right, standard boarding protocol. We go in armed but careful. No unnecessary risks. If things look wrong, we pull out." A few minutes later, the docking clamps hissed as they latched onto the alien hull. The airlock cycled open, revealing a dimly lit passage beyond. The walls were smooth but etched with deep grooves, some resembling claw marks. A faint hum echoed in the silence, like a heartbeat under metal. Mira activated her helmet light, the beam cutting through the murk. "This place is ancient," she murmured. "But these markings, they look fresh." As the team advanced, a sickly sweet smell filled the air. The organic mass Vasquez had detected was now visible, thick, fibrous growths clinging to the walls and ceiling, pulsing slightly as though breathing. Kane motioned for silence as they stepped over the remains of what had once been a crew member. The body was contorted, its face frozen in a silent scream, skin stretched and warped by some unknown force. Drax crouched beside it, his gloved fingers hovering near the body without touching it. No decomposition. Whatever did this happened recently. Solomon swallowed hard. Recently? But where's the thing that did it? A metallic groan reverberated through the ship, distant but growing closer. The lights flickered, and Nova's voice crackled through their comms. "Warning. Environmental stability decreasing. Unknown interference detected." A door ahead of them slid open with a hiss. Beyond it lay the central command chamber, where the distress signal originated. The room was a mess. Consoles shattered, walls gouged with deep marks. A single terminal still flickered weakly, its alien script scrolling in erratic bursts. Mira moved toward it, activating a translator. As the words formed in human language, her breath hitched. "Captain, this isn't a distress call. It's a warning." A sudden, guttural noise rose behind them, something wet and clicking. Kane turned, weapon raised, just as the shadows in the corridor twisted. A shape emerged, tall, sinewy, its body shifting unnaturally as though it couldn't decide on a form. Eyes, too many and too wrong, gleamed in the darkness. The ship had not been abandoned. The nightmare had just begun. The creature moved with an unnatural fluidity, its elongated limbs twitching as if adjusting to the very air around it. Kane fired first, the sharp report of his plasma rifle breaking the oppressive silence. The energy blast struck the thing's torso, but instead of falling, it convulsed, flesh rippling like disturbed water. The wound sealed in seconds, the skin knitting itself back together with grotesque efficiency. "Fall back," Kane barked, shoving Mira toward the corridor. Drax hurled an incendiary grenade as they retreated, the resulting explosion bathing the chamber in orange light. The entity recoiled, its surface blistering where the flames licked at it, but it did not scream. It simply watched them with those shifting, abyssal eyes. They sprinted through the alien ship's passages, the darkness around them thick and suffocating. Solomon brought up the rear, weapon shaking in his grip. "What the hell is that thing?" "Something that doesn't want us here," Drax growled. "And it sure as hell isn't alone." The walls pulsed, the organic growth spreading further, twitching in response to their presence. Kane slammed his palm against a console, trying to override the doors leading back to the docking bay. The screen flickered, then scrolled with alien script too fast to process. "Something's locking us in," Mira said, catching her breath. "That thing. Maybe the whole damn ship is alive." Nova's voice crackled through their comms, distorted as if struggling to reach them. "Warning. External interference disrupting system integrity. Captain, I am detecting." The AI cut out, replaced by static and something else. A whispering, wet and crawling, as though something were trying to speak through the ship itself. Kane slammed his fist against the panel. "We need another way back to the Calypso." Solomon turned, scanning the corridor behind them. "We're not alone." The shadows shifted again. More shapes moved within the darkness. Limbs elongated and twisting, bodies melting and reforming like wax. The first creature had only been the beginning. They ran through the endless, twisting corridors, past walls that seemed to breathe, past corpses too mangled to be called bodies. The ship groaned, metal creaking as though something massive stirred within its depths. The air itself became heavier, thick with an unseen presence pressing against their skulls. They reached an auxiliary control room, slamming the door shut behind them. Drax immediately started working on the panel, bypassing alien security protocols with practiced ease. Mira scanned the room, her pulse hammering. Consoles still flickered with partial power, the remnants of a dead crew's final moments captured in glowing data streams. She accessed a log, voice trembling as the translator worked. "This is Commander Ishak of the Xerian Vanguard. To any who find this, turn back. The hunger has awakened. It is within us, beneath our flesh, within our minds. We are becoming." The message dissolved into static. A video file remained. Mira hesitated, then played it. A flickering hologram of an alien officer filled the air, its chitinous body trembling. Its face, what passed for a face, was contorted in agony. Behind it, the shadows moved. One of its crew members twitched unnaturally, its limbs stretching, body distorting. The officer screamed, but the sound warped as its own flesh began to ripple. The recording cut out in a haze of static and blood. "Jesus," Solomon whispered. Kane exhaled slowly. "It's a parasite, or worse, something that doesn't just kill but remakes." Drax cursed under his breath. "I've got a path to the secondary docking bay, but we're gonna have to move fast." Before they could react, the lights cut out. The room plunged into suffocating darkness. The whispers returned. Mira fumbled for her weapon, breath coming in short gasps. Then the door behind them began to warp, metal twisting inward as something pushed through. A hand, or something resembling a hand, pressed against the surface, fingers too long, too many joints, skin undulating like liquid. Kane fired first. The others followed. Plasma bolts illuminated the room in bursts, revealing nightmare shapes in the dark. The creatures didn't scream when hit. They only moved, shifting, reforming, learning. Drax hurled another incendiary charge. This time, the fire clung to the things, spreading like a sentient force, devouring them. The creatures writhed as the flames consumed their ever-shifting forms, their bodies unable to heal fast enough. "This is our chance, go!" Kane shouted. They sprinted through the corridors, alarms blaring in an alien tongue. The ship itself seemed to react to their movement, the walls closing in, the air thickening with something unseen. The docking bay was in sight, a vast chamber where emergency escape craft once rested. Now only the remnants of something massive remained, A skeletal husk split open from the inside. The floor was slick with a dark, viscous substance that clung to their boots as they ran. They reached the access hatch. Drax punched in the override codes, breath ragged. "Come on! Come on!" Behind them, the whispers grew into a chorus. Kane turned, raising his weapon. Shapes moved in the darkness, too many to count. Not just the creatures, but the remnants of the original crew. Distorted, reshaped, caught between what they once were and what the hunger had made them. The hatch opened. They scrambled inside, sealing it just as the first of the horrors reached them. The last thing Kane saw through the narrowing gap was a face. No longer alien, no longer anything. Its eyes wide and empty, its mouth moving in silent, inhuman prayer. The door locked. For a moment there was silence. Only the sound of their own frantic breathing. Then Nova's voice returned, distorted but audible. "Captain, the entity is attempting to breach the Calypso systems. It is already inside." Kane closed his eyes. The nightmare was far from over. The emergency shuttle shot away from the derelict vessel, its thrusters flaring as it arced toward the Calypso. Kane's hands were tight on the controls, his mind racing. The horror they had witnessed aboard the alien craft still clawed at the edges of his thoughts. But there was no time to dwell. Nova's warning rang in his ears. The entity was already inside their ship. Drax cursed under his breath as he checked the shuttle's sensors. "Whatever that thing is, it's fast. We should be clear, but I don't trust anything anymore." Mira, her pulse still pounding, glanced back at Solomon. He was paler than usual, his fingers twitching around his medkit. "You still with us?" she asked. He nodded, but there was a distant look in his eyes. I saw their faces, the ones from the logs. They knew what was happening to them, and they couldn't stop it. Kane's jaw clenched. "We're not them. We get back, we regroup, and we wipe this thing out." As the Calypso loomed ahead, its docking bay doors began to cycle open. But something felt wrong. The lights along the hull flickered erratically, and an unnatural distortion rippled through the external cameras. The ship's shape seemed to shift for an instant, as if reality itself had warped. Nova's voice crackled through their comms, glitching as it spoke. "Warning, unauthorized, breach, error. Captain." Myra's fingers flew over the interface. "Something's wrong with the AI. It's being corrupted." Kane took a steadying breath. "Weapons ready. If that thing made it aboard, we don't know what we're walking into." The shuttle docked with a metallic clang, and the airlock cycled open. The corridor beyond was dark. Emergency lights flickered, casting long, twitching shadows. The ship felt wrong. The air too thick, the silence too deep. Drax moved ahead, rifle raised. "Nova, report." Static answered at first, then a broken, layered voice. "They are inside. They are inside. They are inside." Mira shuddered. That's not just Nova. The first body was slumped against the bulkhead, its form twisted. A member of the engineering crew, Harrison. His skin was pale, translucent veins spreading beneath the surface like invasive roots. His eyes were open, blank, lips moving in a silent whisper. Solomon crouched beside him, hand hovering over his pulse. Still alive, but he's not responding. Kane barely had time to process that before movement flickered at the edge of his vision. The corridor ahead stretched and shifted, the walls seeming to pulse, and then something stepped forward. It had once been human. Now it was a grotesque imitation, its limbs elongated, fingers tapering to needle-like points. Its head tilted as if listening, mouth opening just slightly. No teeth, no tongue, just darkness. Then it lunged. Gunfire erupted, plasma rounds slamming into its shifting body. It convulsed but kept coming, its flesh moving around the wounds. Mira fired point-blank, the blast severing its arm at the shoulder. But instead of falling, the severed limb liquefied, slithering back toward the stump and reattaching with grotesque ease. "Burn it," Kane ordered. Drax was already moving, hurling an incendiary charge. The thing shrieked as flames engulfed it, its body unraveling like melting wax. The fire spread unnaturally fast, devouring it completely within seconds. The air filled with the sickening scent of burning flesh and something else. Something old and wrong. Then the whispers returned. From deeper within the ship, voices rose in a terrible harmony. The sound wasn't just in their ears. It was inside their heads, threading through their thoughts. The ship wasn't just infected. It was awake. Nova's voice returned, but it was no longer just the AI speaking. They are learning. They are speaking. They are becoming. Kane's breath came fast and sharp. We need to get to the reactor. If this thing is inside the Calypso, we're not saving the ship. We're making sure it never leaves this system. Myra's fingers trembled over her weapon, but she nodded. Self-destruct. Controlled overload, Drax confirmed grimly. We can rig the core to breach, give ourselves a few minutes to get to the escape pods. Solomon swallowed hard. What if it's already in us? No one answered. They moved fast, pushing toward the engineering deck. The corridors grew darker. The walls no longer metal but something softer, something alive. The ship was changing around them. The moment they reached the reactor chamber, Nova spoke again. You cannot stop it. You cannot leave. It is already within. The control panels flickered wildly. Data streams corrupted. Drax shoved a tool into the override port, bypassing security as he worked to destabilize the core. Mira kept her weapon trained on the doorway, heart hammering. Then Solomon gasped. They turned. He stood stiffly, eyes wide, his breathing shallow. I hear it, he whispered. His hands trembled as he clutched his skull. It's in my head. Kane moved toward him, but Solomon staggered back. Stay away, he choked. His veins darkened, his skin rippling. I can feel it changing me. Myra's stomach twisted. No, we can still. He met her gaze. There was still him in there, fighting it. And then he turned his weapon on himself and pulled the trigger. The shot rang through the chamber and Solomon collapsed. Kane clenched his jaw, grief tightening his throat. But there was no time. The reactor's core alarm blared. Drax had done it. The countdown began, a relentless sequence that meant the end of the Calypso. They ran. The ship screamed. Not metal, not machinery, something else. A wail that vibrated through their bones, through their thoughts, through the very space around them. The entity knew. It was angry. The escape pods were in sight when the last of the crew appeared before them. Or what had once been the crew. They stood in the corridor, motionless. Their bodies unfinished in their transformation. Their eyes, those that still had them, were blank. Empty. And then they rushed forward. Fire and plasma filled the air. Bodies writhing, reshaping, burning. Drax fell back as one of the things lashed out, its fingers extending like spears, piercing through his shoulder. He roared in pain, wrenching himself free. Mira dragged him toward the pod as Kane covered them. The creatures collapsed in the fire, but the ship itself was still shifting, closing in, walls liquefying into something hungry. They stumbled into the pod, sealing the hatch just as the mass reached them. Kane punched the emergency release, and the pod ejected, hurtling away from the Calypso. Through the viewport, they watched as the reactor breached. A blinding light engulfed the ship, and then it was gone, consumed in a fireball that burned away everything, leaving only silence in its wake. Mira exhaled, hands shaking. Is it over? Drax, bleeding but alive, gave a grim smile. It better be. Kane stared out into the void, expression unreadable. Then, in the quiet of the escape pod, Nova's voice whispered one last time. You brought it with you.